Somewhere in an office right now, a 23-year-old is sitting across from their manager in a performance review, and they are not nodding quietly. They're pushing back. They're asking why someone with fewer results got a higher rating. They're requesting specific explanations for feedback that was described as great overall, but there's some room for development. They're naming competing companies' salary numbers out loud in the room while the manager's eye twitches. Older generations watch this and think, what is wrong with this kid? Boomers sat quietly. Millennials mostly sat quietly, too, but sent a passive-aggressive follow-up email 3 days later, framed as, just wanting to make sure I understood your feedback correctly. Gen X accepted it, went home, and had a drink. But Gen Z walked in with receipts printed out, highlighted, and the corporate world has absolutely no idea what to do about it. Here's what's interesting to me. This isn't rudeness. It's not entitlement, at least not in the way people are describing it. It's something more mechanical than that. Because when you actually run the numbers, the real numbers, not the HR talking points, not the LinkedIn thought leadership posts, staying quiet in a performance review is one of the most expensive financial decisions most people make repeatedly every single year without ever once noticing the cost. It never shows up as a line item. It never sends you a receipt. It just compounds silently in the background while you tell yourself you're being professional. 58% of employees accept the first compensation number their employer offers without any counter. The average person loses over $800,000 across their career just from not negotiating at the entry level. Not from bad investments. Not from overspending on lifestyle. Not from the avocado toast the opinion columnist blamed for a decade. From silence. From nodding, smiling, and saying, sounds great. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be part of the team. So, the question isn't why Gen Z is loud in performance reviews. The real question is why were we all so quiet for so long and who exactly benefited from that silence. We're going to explain how the performance review system actually works, why it was built the way it was built, and why Gen Z's behavior, as uncomfortable and chaotic as it appears from the outside, is actually a rational response to finally understanding the incentive structure underneath it all. And then I'm going to tell you what the smart version of this looks like. Because loud isn't the same as effective. And most people are confusing the two loudly. I want to be clear about what we're not doing here. We're not doing the quit your job and start a business thing. That's lazy advice dressed up as freedom philosophy, and it translates for maybe 3% of the people who hear it. What we're going to do is take the corporate compensation system apart and look at what's actually inside it. So you can make decisions inside it or outside it with your eyes fully open instead of optimistically squinted. The machine. That's the metaphor we're using today. Not because it sounds clean and reductive. Okay. Partly because it sounds clean and reductive, but because it's accurate. The corporate compensation system is a machine. It has moving parts. It has design choices. It was built by specific people for a specific purpose. And like any machine, if you understand how it works, you can either operate it more effectively or decide it's the wrong machine for what you're trying to build. But you cannot make that decision from inside the machine while you're still treating it like it has your best interest as a design goal. Most people treat the performance review like a report card. They go in, they receive a grade, they feel good or bad about the grade, and they leave. They're experiencing it as a judgment, a verdict on their work. And that framing puts them in a completely passive position. You're the student, they're the teacher. Your job is to sit still and receive feedback with the appropriate level of humility. But that's not what a performance review actually is. That's just a costume it wears. Under the costume, a performance review is a negotiation. It always was. And every negotiation has either a winner and a loser, or a minimum, a person who moved the outcome and a person who didn't. When you sit down and nod, you didn't opt out of the negotiation. You just lost it by default. Politely, the modern performance review was formalized in large American corporations around the 1940s and 1950s. The context was industrial management. Companies had grown enormous after the war. Massive workforces, standardized production, the need to control human output at scale. They needed systems that could justify compensation decisions across hundreds or thousands of employees without having individual conversations every time. So they built a ritual, an annual ritual where a manager would assess an employee against a standardized rubric, assign them a category, and that category would determine what percentage raise they received from a predetermined budget pool. Now, here's the part nobody mentions. The people who designed this system were not designing it to help employees understand their market value. They were designing it to help companies manage compensation costs predictably. Those are two completely different goals with two completely different outcomes for the person on the receiving end. Helping employees understand their market value would produce a system that gives you accurate external reference points, shows you where you stand against what the market actually pays for your skill, and tells you honestly when you're underpaid. Managing compensation costs predictably produces a system that ties your raise to internal metrics the company controls, decouples your pay from external market movements, and makes you feel like your compensation is the result of a fair internal process, so you're less likely to go look elsewhere. Think about what managing compensation costs predictably actually means in practice. It means raises need to be small, incremental, and controllable. It means the evaluation needs to feel personal about your attitude, your impact, your collaboration, so that if the raise is disappointing, you feel responsible for it rather than questioning the structure that produced it. It means the system needs to generate enough sense of process and fairness that you trust it more than you trust your ability to get a better deal somewhere else. That's not a conspiracy. That's just design logic. Someone made choices. Those choices served a purpose, and that purpose was not you. General Electric famously popularized forced ranking in the 1980s. A system where a fixed percentage of employees, often 10%, had to be rated as low performers regardless of the actual quality of the workforce. The bottom 10% were managed out. The top 20% were rewarded. The middle 70 were the machine's consistent output. This system spread widely across American corporations because it created the impression of rigorous meritocracy while actually just creating a competitive internal dynamic that lowered the likelihood of collective action. The machine was doing multiple things at once, and meritocracy was only one of the labels on the box. Here's a number that makes all of this concrete. The average merit raise inside a large American corporation right now sits somewhere between 2.5% and 3.5%. That's in a world where job switches, same skill level, same experience tier, just at a different company, regularly access salary increases between 12 and 20%. So if you stay at a company and accept the machine's output, you're capturing roughly 3%. If you move externally, you're realistically accessing 4 to 6 times that in terms of compensation movement. The machine is not just keeping your raises small. The machine is specifically designed to make 3% feel like something you earned through effort and performance, so that you optimize inside it rather than questioning why the ceiling is so low. And the really elegant part of the machine's design, elegant in the engineering sense, not the ethical sense, is that the raise is attached to a performance rating. So instead of thinking the architecture of this system caps my income growth at 3% by default, you think I need to find out what it takes to get a 4 instead of a 3, so I get 3.2% instead of 2.8%. 8%. You are now spending your energy optimizing inside a constraint that was placed there by someone else, and you feel productive doing it. The machine has turned you into a free maintenance worker. You are debugging yourself on behalf of the system. That's the first thing I want you to really hold on to as we go further, because it explains almost everything that comes after. The machine was not designed for you. It was designed for a purpose that is structurally at odds with your purpose. And once you see that clearly without anger, because anger is also a way of not thinking straight, everything about how to interact with it differently becomes a lot more obvious. Now, this is where Gen Z enters the picture. And this is the part that's actually interesting to me from a systems perspective, because Gen Z didn't figure this out through superior intelligence. They didn't read some revolutionary text on corporate power structures. They figured it out because of a structural information shift that happened across approximately an 8-year window, roughly 2015 through 2023, that broke one of the machine's most critical dependencies. The machine required information asymmetry to function correctly. The company knew what it was paying everyone at every level. The company knew what the external market was paying for any given skill set. The employee knew never, so the employee had no rational basis for negotiation. They were sitting across from someone with a complete picture of the board playing a game where they could see maybe a third of the pieces. The company had a full map. The employee had a rough sketch. Then Glassdoor became mainstream. Then LinkedIn started surfacing salary ranges and compensation benchmarks. Then Levels.fi became essentially a public database of tech industry compensation in extraordinary detail. Then the salary transparency TikTok trend hit, and suddenly people were posting their exact pay stubs in comment sections. Then states started passing salary disclosure laws. Colorado in 2021, New York in 2023, California expanding its rules that forced companies to post salary ranges in job listings. Then anonymous shared spreadsheets started circulating inside industries where people compared their exact compensation. The information asymmetry collapsed. Not completely, but enough. Enough that a 23-year-old walking into a performance review at a company with posted salary bands can cross-reference their current salary against what the company posted for the same role externally against what Glassdoor shows for their level against what their peers shared in a Slack channel and arrive in that room with something that previous generations genuinely did not have data, real, comparable, externally sourced data about what they're actually worth in the open market. And when you have that data and you're not using it, you're not being professional. You're being financially passive in a room where financial decisions are being made about you. That's the first reason Gen Z is loud. Not attitude, not entitlement. Information. The information environment changed. Rational behavior changed with it. Now, let's run the actual math, because this is where it stops being abstract and starts being uncomfortable in a specific way that I think is useful. Picture two people, same age, 22, same skill set, same job at the same company, starting salary of $60,000 a year, same performance output, genuinely identically productive. Let's call them Person A and Person B. Person A accepts the machine's output every year. They get a rating that feels decent, a raise that averages 3%, and they feel good about the trajectory. They're growing. The numbers go up each year. They trust the process. They stay at the company for 10 years. Person B treats every performance review as a moment in a longer negotiation. They don't leave immediately. They don't make enemies. They don't walk in and slam a competing offer on the table in year one, but they are consistently strategic. In year two, they have a direct conversation about the criteria for a title promotion that unlocks a higher salary band, and they get it. In year four, they go through an external interview process, get an offer, and bring it back. The company matches it. In year seven, they do a version of this again. Each time they engage strategically, they access somewhere between 8 and 15% above what the passive path would have produced. After 10 years, Person A is making approximately $80,600 a year. 10 years of 3% compounding on $60,000. In isolation, that looks fine. That's real growth. Except then you look at Person B. Person B over that same decade at the same company by engaging the machine differently is looking at somewhere between $112,000 and $130,000 a year. Same job, same company, same output. The compounding gap in cumulative earnings over that 10-year window is somewhere north of $350,000. And that assumes they never left the company at all. If Person B had moved externally once to access an external market salary, that gap becomes significantly wider. We're potentially talking about the difference between two completely different financial trajectories. And the fork in the road was not skill, not education, not luck. It was negotiation behavior. Here's the reversal. You think the problem is that Person A wasn't good enough to earn the higher raises. You think performance is the variable being measured. But the research on compensation outcomes across industries, across performance rating tiers, consistently shows something that sounds wrong until you sit with it long enough. Your willingness to negotiate is a stronger predictor of your compensation growth than your actual performance rating. Read that again if you need to. Your negotiation behavior predicts your income trajectory more reliably than your performance does. The machine is not primarily rewarding performance. The machine is primarily rewarding leverage. And it will never tell you that, because if it told you that, the whole psychology of the performance rating system would collapse overnight. Companies publicly claim they pay for performance. They have entire talent management philosophies built around this claim. They have competency frameworks, calibration sessions, 9-box grids, and stack ranking tools. All of it dressed in the language of meritocracy. But the data on actual outcomes doesn't support the story. What the data supports is that the people who understand the machine's actual incentive structure and interact with it accordingly get better outputs from it. The meritocracy is partially real and partially theater, and the theater is working harder than most people realize. So when a 23-year-old sits down in a performance review and says, "I've been looking at the market data and there appears to be a gap between my current compensation and what this role commands externally. Can we have that conversation?" They are not being difficult. They are playing the game according to how the game actually works, as opposed to how they were told it works. The older generation's critique of this behavior is genuinely ironic when you look at it that way. The critique is essentially, why won't you let the machine underpay you quietly the way we did? And the answer is because we know what the machine is now. If you're sitting here and the architecture of this is starting to click in a way it didn't before, you probably want to stay around for the next time I take something apart like this. Subscribe. That's the whole pitch. The algorithm is not reliable, so manually make sure you're seeing the channel. Here's where it gets more nuanced, and where a lot of people hear the first two parts and draw the wrong conclusion. Being loud in a performance review is not automatically smart. It is not automatically effective. Most people hear "you should negotiate" and immediately translate that into "I should express my feelings more forcefully." And those are not the same thing. They don't produce the same outcomes. In fact, one of them actively damages your position while making you feel like you're advocating for yourself. I want to give you a precise way of thinking about this. 3 levels of machine interaction, because the whole conversation about Gen Z and performance reviews collapses these 3 levels into one thing, which makes the discussion useless. Level 1 is silence. You accept the machine's output without engaging it. You nod, you receive, you leave. You lose by default every single time without exception. Professionally competent, financially passive. The machine loves you. A level 2 is emotional noise. You feel undervalued, which you probably are, and you express that feeling in the review. "I feel like I deserved a higher rating. I've been working really hard, and I don't think that's being reflected here. I'm honestly a little frustrated by this." These statements are emotionally accurate. They are also strategically counterproductive. The manager in that room is not empowered to respond to emotional expression. They have a budget. They have calibration decisions that were made in a room you were not invited to, by a committee you didn't know existed. Your feelings are not an input to that process. And worse, expressing them emotionally signals that you don't understand how the machine works, which makes your manager less likely to advocate for you when the calibration committee meets next time, because you look like someone who will be a problem rather than an asset. Level 3 is strategic leverage. This is different in kind, not just in degree. Strategic leverage is information-based. It's external reference-based. It's forward-oriented and calmly transactional. It sounds like I've been tracking market rates for this role, and I'm seeing a consistent gap between my current compensation and what comparable positions are paying. I'd like to understand what the path looks like to close that gap internally. Or I want to be specific about what hitting a higher rating next cycle looks like. Can we define those criteria concretely today, so I'm not surprised in 12 months? Or the most powerful version? I've had some conversations externally, and I want to give you the first opportunity to respond before I need to make any decisions. These are not the same thing as the Level 2 version. Level 2 is venting with better vocabulary. Level 3 is a mechanical input into a system that responds to specific inputs and ignores others. Level 2 might feel better in the moment. Level 3 moves the machine. Here's the uncomfortable part of Level 3 that most people skip over. Strategic leverage only works if it's real. If you say, "I've had conversations externally," and you haven't, the manager can usually sense that. People read desperation. They read the absence of real alternatives. It changes your posture, your word choices, the questions you're willing to press, the pauses you accept. And if your leverage is bluffed, a sophisticated manager will wait you out because they know you're not actually going anywhere. Your threat has no credibility, and everyone in the room can feel it. So the actual prerequisite for level 3 isn't learning negotiation scripts. It's building a real external position before you walk into the room. That means having 2 or 3 conversations with other companies over the previous 60 to 90 days. It means knowing, not guessing, knowing what a competitive offer for your skill set looks like right now in the market. It means being genuinely willing to take one of those offers if the machine doesn't respond. The willingness to walk is the leverage. Everything else is just presentation around it. The profile that gets the best outcomes from performance reviews is not the most emotionally expressive person in the room or the most aggressive or the one with the best negotiation vocabulary. It's the person who is the most genuinely indifferent to losing the negotiation because they have real alternatives and they know it and the manager can sense it. Calm, specific, and actually ready to leave. That is the negotiation profile that moves the machine. There's a specific genre of LinkedIn post that appears approximately every quarter written by a VP or director of something at a mid-size company explaining that their Gen Z employees lack professionalism and don't understand how corporate environments work and were blindsided by being passed over for a promotion after pushing back inappropriately during their performance review. The post gets 47,000 likes from other VPs who tag each other in the comments. And then if you scroll down far enough, you find the replies from 23-year-olds explaining that the employee was literally just asking for the salary range that had been legally posted in the job listing. These posts exist. They are published on a schedule. You could set an alarm. Let me tell you a short story, not about me specifically. I'm going to construct this the way I've seen it play out across different people in different industries because the pattern is consistent enough to describe reliably. There's a guy, let's call him Marcus, 26 years old. Works at a mid-size marketing technology company. He's been there 3 years. He's genuinely good. Not exceptional, but consistently good. Delivers on projects. Communicates world is reliable without needing to be managed. He gets a meets expectations rating for the 2nd year in a row, which translates into a raise of 3% on his base salary. He's at $72,000 now, up from roughly $68,000 when he was hired. He's a little frustrated. He's seen enough online to suspect this is low, but he's not sure by how much, and he doesn't want to be seen as difficult. He smiles. He accepts it. He thanks his manager for the feedback. He goes home. For weeks later, Marcus sees a job posting. His company is hiring for a role that is functionally the job Marcus has been doing for 3 years. Same responsibility, same title, same team. The posted salary range is $85,000 to $98,000. Marcus does the math. His company is willing to pay an external candidate up to $26,000 more per year than it is currently paying Marcus. Someone who already does the job, who already knows the systems, who doesn't require onboarding, who has 3 years of demonstrated performance in the role. The machine has quantified exactly how much it undervalues retention relative to acquisition, and it posted the answer publicly in the job listing. Most people in Marcus' position do one of 2 things. They either say nothing, they close the tab, feel vaguely miserable, and keep going, or they go to their manager, mention the posting, and ask in a slightly apologetic way whether there's any room to look at their compensation. The apologetic version usually gets a response along the lines of, "I hear you. Let me see what I can do. I'll bring it up." You know how budget cycles work. Translation: nothing happens. Maybe a $200 increase 3 months from now if they're lucky. Marcus takes a third route. He starts a job search. Not loudly, not dramatically. He updates his profile. He reaches out to a few contacts. He goes through the interview process at 4 companies over 60 days. He receives 2 solid offers. One for $89,000, one for $93,000. Now, he has real leverage. He has 2 documented competitive external valuations of what he's worth in the current market. He goes to his manager, not emotionally, not with frustration. He says calmly, "I want to stay here. I like the team. I believe in where this is going, but I want to be honest with you. I've been approached by some other opportunities and I'm looking at an offer at $93,000. I want to give you the first chance to respond before I have to make a decision. His company comes back with $88,000 in one conversation. After 3 years of 3% raises, the machine moved 22% in a single interaction because the input changed. Here's the math on the full picture. If Marcus had accepted the machine's default output, 3% per year starting at $68,000, by year 7, he would be earning approximately $81,000. Instead, he is now at $88,000 in year 3. He is negotiating from a higher base. His manager now has direct evidence that he has external alternatives and is willing to use them, which permanently changes how he is thought about in retention conversations. If he does this once more in the next 4 years, he is realistically at $115,000 by year 7. The cumulative earnings difference over that 7-year window is somewhere between $160,000 and $210,000 from 60 days of discomfort from 2 interviews he didn't even want the jobs from one calm conversation in a conference room. And here's the part that completes the picture. Marcus' company knew he was underpaid before he said anything. The internal compensation review had flagged him as below midpoint for his band. HR had noted it. The manager was aware. They just didn't have a structural reason to fix it until the machine's core assumption that Marcus had nowhere else to go or didn't know he had somewhere else to go turned out to be wrong. The machine does not automatically correct for fairness. It manages cost. It moves when it has to, and it has to move when you give it a real reason to. Picture this. Inside a Fortune 500 company, there's a meeting that happens before every performance review cycle. Managers sit in a room together, no employees present, and they negotiate ratings. Manager A says she thinks someone on her team should get a 4. Manager B thinks that's high given how the calibration was set up. They go back and forth. They settle on a 3+, whatever that means internally. The employee whose rating was being decided is at their desk thinking they're about to receive an objective assessment of their work. They are not. They are about to receive the output of a negotiation they were excluded from. And when they sit down in the review, nod thoughtfully, say, "That's really helpful feedback. Thank you." And leave the machine knows this is working correctly. Now, let's talk about the structural shift that's happening underneath all of this, because the performance review conversation exists inside a larger context that most people aren't tracking, and that context changes what you should actually be optimizing for. The labor market has been going through a structural change in the distribution of leverage between employers and employees that has accelerated meaningfully between 2020 and 2026, and it's moved in one consistent direction toward portability. What does portability mean in this context? It means the degree to which your skills, your reputation, and your output capacity can travel with you from one employer to another without significant loss of value. The more portable your skill set, the more leverage you have in any negotiation, including the performance review. The less portable your skill set, the more the machine controls the negotiation because there's nowhere else to take the negotiation. For most of the 20th century, skill portability was deliberately low. Skills were learned inside company systems and weren't transferable without significant friction. Career capital was accumulated inside a single employer's ecosystem. Relationships, institutional knowledge, pension benefits tied to tenure. Leaving meant restarting. The machine was designed around an assumption of low portability because low portability means the employee has limited alternatives, which means the machine doesn't have to move. Then several things happened simultaneously, and their combined effect was larger than any single change. Remote work normalized, which removed geographic lock-in as a portability constraint. Professional platforms made reputations visible and searchable in ways that didn't exist before. Open source tools and cloud infrastructure meant skills were increasingly platform agnostic rather than employer specific. Freelance and contract markets demonstrated that work could be decoupled from employment as a category, and AI tools began compressing the timeline for skill acquisition dramatically, which means the gap between entry-level and productive shortened in a way that benefits the individual rather than the institution. Gen Z entered the workforce after all of this was already in place. They never had a period where skills felt locked inside a company. They never experienced a world where your professional reputation wasn't somewhat portable and publicly visible. So their implicit leverage position is structurally different from someone who entered the workforce in 1989 and spent 20 years inside one company's internal ecosystem. It's not attitude, it's arithmetic. This is why companies are genuinely struggling with Gen Z workforce management in a way that goes beyond the usual generational friction narrative. It's not that Gen Z is lazy. Aggregate data and productivity doesn't support that claim. It's not entitlement generated from thin air. The leverage structure that made the machine function as designed is eroding. The employee is increasingly likely to have real alternatives. The machine doesn't have a software update for that. It was calibrated for a world that is becoming less true every year. What is the machine doing in response? This is worth tracking because it tells you exactly where the stress points are and what the near-term environment looks like. Companies are investing heavily in culture and belonging. Elaborate perks, employee resource groups, team retreats, people-first mission statements, strong employer branding campaigns. Why? Because they understand at some level that financial leverage is weakening and they need to substitute psychological and social leverage. If the employee feels deeply attached to the company's identity, the team, the community, they'll accept below-market compensation more readily because leaving carries a social cost that feels bigger than the financial gain. This isn't always cynically designed. Some of the people making these decisions genuinely believe in what they're building, but the incentive structure produces this outcome regardless of intent. Cultural attachment is a machine component. It functions to reduce employee willingness to exercise portability. And if you understand that, you can appreciate the culture for what it is, a real thing with genuine value for your day-to-day experience without letting it cloud your economic rationality when economic decisions are being made. Here's how I'd say this precisely. Keep two separate accounting systems. One for your experience at work, the culture, the team, the sense of meaning and connection. These things are real and they matter for your daily quality of life, and you shouldn't dismiss them. The other accounting system is for your economic position. What you're paid, what the market says you're worth, what your trajectory looks like, whether you're building portable capital or company-specific capital. Your affection for your colleague should not appear in the column where you're calculating whether to take an external offer. Those are different spreadsheets. The machine will consistently try to get you to mix them. But you love this team, but think about how much you've built here, but you know how much we value you. These are real things. They are also being used as financial arguments, and they are not valid financial arguments. Our mental performance review as an institution is also under structural pressure independent of any generational behavior. Major companies have already moved toward quarterly feedback loops or continuous performance conversations, partly because the annual review was producing outcomes that felt disconnected from actual performance over 12-month spans. Pay transparency laws in multiple states are forcing salary ranges into job postings, which eliminates one of the machine's key information advantages before the employee even starts. Remote and hybrid work has shifted performance evaluation away from visibility-based metrics. Who's seen in the office, who laughs at the right moments in meetings, toward output-based metrics that are more portable and more comparable across companies. Each of these trends individually strengthens the informed employee's position. Combined, they represent a meaningful structural shift in who holds information and leverage in the compensation conversation. The performance review is a once-a-year theater of control. We will tell you what you're worth on our schedule in a format we designed, and you will receive this information with appropriate gratitude is losing its grip. Not completely, not everywhere, but directionally. I want to say the uncomfortable version of all this clearly because I think it's important not to gloss over it. Not everyone benefits equally from this shift. The people who benefit most from increased transparency and portability are the people whose skills are genuinely scarce and in demand. More information about market rates is extremely good for those people. It closes the gap between what they're being paid and what they're worth. But if your skills are commoditized, easily replicated, or increasingly replaceable by automation, more transparency doesn't increase your leverage. It gives you clearer visibility into a weak position, which is useful information but not intrinsically empowering. This means the real strategic question, the one that determines your 10-year financial outcome more than any negotiation tactic, is not how to be louder or smarter in the performance review. It's whether you are actively building skills and a reputation that give you real portability and real scarcity value, or whether you're spending your energy optimizing your performance within a machine that has the structural ability to replace you or marginalize you. Regardless of how well you play the game, those are two different strategies. One takes place inside the machine, one takes place outside it simultaneously, and the performance review is almost entirely irrelevant to the second one. Let's go back to where we started. A 23-year-old sitting across from their manager, not nodding quietly. The older generation calls it entitlement. Management consultants write frameworks for it. HR departments send all-hands emails about navigating difficult feedback conversations. But here's what it actually is. It's the first generation of employees who entered the workforce already knowing in broad terms how the machine works. They grew up watching their parents trust the machine. They watched that trust not always pay off. They grew up with access to compensation data that converted the opaque black box of corporate pay into something legible, comparable, and discussable. They grew up with a baseline assumption that jobs are transactional, skills are portable, and institutional loyalty is something that should be demonstrated in both directions before it's expected. That's not a character flaw. That's a logical response to the information environment they grew up in. Now, a lot of what gets labeled refusing to stay quiet is still level 2 behavior dressed up as level 3. It's emotional noise with better vocabulary. It feels like resistance. It registers as resistance, but it doesn't move the machine because it doesn't change the leverage position. And that distinction matters because the goal isn't to make the manager uncomfortable. The goal is to get a different output from the machine. Those aren't the same target. Here's what I'd actually leave you with. 3 things, not generic, not motivational, based entirely on the system we just walked through. The first one, stop treating the review as the event and start treating it as the readout. The machine does not change its output during the review. It produces an output based on inputs that were fed into it over the previous 12 months. The inputs that move the machine are your documented achievements, yes, but more critically, how visible your external alternatives have been, whether you have clearly communicated what you want and what timeline you're operating on, and whether the machine has any reason to believe you will leave if it doesn't respond. The review is where you read what the machine calculated. The work of changing the calculation happens in the other 64 days. On the second one, build real leverage before you need it, not during a crisis. The best negotiators in any context are the ones who are the most genuinely indifferent to the outcome because they have real alternatives. That indifference is built in advance. In practice, this means maintaining active conversations with people outside your company. Not necessarily formal interviews, but professional relationships that keep you visible and calibrated. It means knowing with reasonable accuracy what 2 or 3 other employers would pay you right now for your skill set. It means keeping your external profile current enough that opportunities occasionally find you without you having to go looking. This isn't disloyalty. This is how markets work. Your employer is benchmarking your role against the market constantly. The least you can do is maintain symmetrical information. The third one, and this is the one that determines your outcome at the 10-year and 20-year level, not the 2-year level. Protect your leverage outside the machine. The performance review is a lagging indicator of your leverage. Your actual leverage is built in decisions you make outside working hours, outside the review room, outside the machine entirely. What skills are you building that have value independent of your employer's willingness to recognize them? What reputation do you have that would survive if your company disappeared tomorrow? What are you building outside your salary, investments, skills, networks, small bets on things you can own? That means the machine doesn't have a monopoly on your income ceiling. A negotiated raise from $68,000 to $88,000 is genuinely meaningful. It's real money. Over 10 years, it compounds into something significant. I'm not minimizing it. But it is still someone else deciding your ceiling, and that ceiling is still subject to budget cycles and calibration committees and decisions made in rooms you're not in. The people who eventually move entirely beyond the machine's constraints do so by building leverage that the machine cannot measure, cannot calibrate, and cannot control. Skills with external markets, reputations that exist independent of an employer's reference. Assets that produce income without requiring a performance rating. That's the full picture. Not quit your job, not follow your passion. The machine exists. Use it the most effective way you can while you're inside it, and simultaneously build something outside it that changes your leverage position at the fundamental level. Not loud, not quiet, precise, informed, and genuinely willing to walk when the numbers make sense. The machine doesn't hate you. It doesn't love you either. It's a machine. It does exactly what it was designed to do. Your job is to understand who designed it and for whom.